In the sprawling, shadow-drenched maze of Port Argent, Jack Callahan lived a quiet life, seeking oblivion in the clang of steel and the sweat of honest labor. He was just another dockworker, a ghost in the machine, desperate to keep the battlefield echoes of his past silenced. But the port holds dark secrets, and when Jack stumbles upon a brutal execution and the illicit transfer of terrifying cargo masterminded by the ruthless Blackwater Serpents, his carefully constructed anonymity shatters. Marked for death by a gang that sees only a simple worker, they move to silence their witness. What they don't know is that Jack Callahan was once Captain Callahan, callsign Neptune, a former Marine Force Recon leader trained in the deadly arts of amphibious assault and quiet lethality. Their hunt has just awakened a sleeping tiger, and the gritty docks are about to become a new kind of warzone. The salt spray was a constant companion, kissing Jack Callahan's face with a chill that seeped deeper than the damp morning air. It mingled with the pervasive scent of diesel fumes, brine, and something vaguely decaying, the perpetual perfume of Port Argent. For 5 years, this sprawling, chaotic ecosystem of steel, concrete, and water had been his world. A deliberate exchange for a past he desperately wanted to keep buried beneath the waves he once commanded. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Part 1. Echoes in the Steel Labyrinth. The salt spray wasn't just moisture, it was memory. Each cold kiss on Jack Callahan's face, sharp in the pre-dawn chill of Port Argent, carried phantom traces of distant oceans, of troop transports cutting through black water under starless skies. Here, it mingled with the acrid bite of diesel exhaust, the deep, fishy decay clinging to the pilings, and the metallic tang of rusting steel, the discordant symphony of his chosen exile. For 5 years, this sprawling, grimy beast of commerce and shadow had been his sanctuary, a concrete and water labyrinth where he could lose himself, burying Captain Callahan, callsign Neptune, deep beneath the anonymous bulk of Jack, the dockworker. He moved through the pre-shift bustle of Pier 12 with a deceptive lethargy that masked coiled efficiency. Years of wrestling 1,000-pound mooring lines, guiding multi-ton container chassis through tight spots, and the sheer relentless physicality of the job had layered muscle onto his already large frame. But the economy of his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned his periphery even while focused on a task, the subconscious assessment of angles and cover that came from a different, harder school. Beneath the faded sanctuary of his flannel shirt and grease-stained overalls, scars mapped terrain far removed from accidental scrapes with cargo hooks. They spoke of shrapnel, hurried field stitches, and the brutal intimacy of close-quarters combat. He kept his interactions minimal, functional. A nod to Manny, the wiry foreman whose caffeine-fueled energy never seemed to dip. A brief exchange with Maria from logistics about a misplaced manifest. Shared silence during smoke breaks with guys whose names he barely registered beyond their function. Hook handler, straddle driver, gate checker. He offered a hand when needed, his strength a reliable commodity, but deflected personal inquiries with practiced vagueness. "Where you from, Callahan?" Might get a down south originally. Family, a non-committal shrug. They labeled him quiet, dependable, strong as a damn mule. None saw the phantom weight in his gaze sometimes, the momentary flicker of hyper-awareness when a crane dropped its load with a sudden clang, echoing explosions only he could hear. None suspected the hands, calloused by rough hemp and cold steel, had once deftly disarmed underwater mines or gripped the worn stock of an M4 carbine through hours of tense overwatch. This life was a penance and a shield. The rhythm was brutal, simple. Wake before dawn, push his body to its limits amidst the noise and grime, eat a solitary meal in his small, third-floor apartment overlooking the container stacks, a view chosen for its strategic sightlines, a habit he couldn't shake, fall into an exhausted sleep. The physical fatigue was a welcome anesthetic, dulling the edges of memory, quieting the ghosts of Team Trident, the faces etched by sand, salt, and the finality of loss. Most nights it was enough, but sometimes the mournful moan of a foghorn became the cry of a wounded man. The rhythmic squeal of worn machinery transformed into the track clatter of an approaching enemy vehicle. On those nights, sleep was a distant beachhead, unreachable. Port Argent pulsed with more than legitimate trade. It breathed secrets, exhaled corruption. Its veins, the murky waterways, the shadowed alleys between towering container stacks, the cavernous bellies of forgotten warehouses, pumped illicit goods as relentlessly as the tides. Everyone knew about the gangs, territorial predators carving out niches in the port's underbelly. Flare-ups were sudden, violent, and quickly muffled. The apex predator, the shadow looming largest, was Victor Martel and his Blackwater Serpents. Whispers painted Martel as ex-Soviet special forces, a man who carved his empire from the docks with surgical ruthlessness. His network allegedly stretched from sophisticated smuggling operations and labor racketeering to darker, unspoken ventures. His presence was felt more than seen, but his chief enforcer, Razor Russo, a slab of scarred muscle whose dead eyes promised uncomplicated brutality, was a frequent, unnerving sight, often flanked by coiled, watchful thugs who moved with predatory confidence. Jack adhered to the Dockworker's code. See nothing you ain't paid to see. Hear nothing you ain't meant to hear. Say nothing, ever. He'd observed the subtle signs. Crates handled with disproportionate care, hushed meetings in dimly lit corners dissolving at his approach, Russo himself overseeing late-night loadings conspicuously absent from official logs. He filed these observations away, compartmentalizing them with the same discipline he'd used to manage combat stress. It wasn't his war. He'd had his fill of wars. Then came the Tuesday night shift that unraveled everything. Fog, thick as wet wool, rolled in off the Atlantic, muffling sounds, swallowing distances, turning the familiar landscape of the port into an alien terrain. A last-minute manpower shuffle landed Jack overseeing a skeleton crew finishing up at Warehouse 9, bordering the derelict, condemned Warehouse 7. The foghorns groaned their melancholy dirge, each blast swallowed by the cloying gray embrace that cut visibility down to spitting distance. Sal, the crane operator, was bleary-eyed in his cab high above. Two bored security guards, miles away at the main gate, were likely nursing lukewarm coffee and counting minutes. Jack was making his final rounds, his heavy-duty flashlight beam a lonely probe slicing through the swirling vapor, ticking off container serial numbers against his manifest. That's when the sound reached him, incongruous and alarming. The low, guttural thrum of powerful marine engines, idling somewhere nearby, originating from the black hole that was Warehouse 7. The place was officially off-limits, tagged as structurally unsound. No legitimate vessel would dock there, certainly not deep inside the structure itself, not at this hour. A prickle of unease, sharp and unwelcome, traced its way up his spine. Old habits died hard. He switched off his flashlight, plunging himself into the diffused orange glow cast by the distant sodium lamps. His eyes adjusted quickly. Moving with a stealth honed on approaches far more dangerous than this, he melted into the gap between two towering stacks of refrigerated containers, their cooling units humming a low counterpoint to the mystery engines. He used the stacks as cover, his boots finding silent purchase on the damp, gritty concrete. He found a vantage point, a high stack of discarded wooden pallets leaning precariously against the warehouse wall, offering a sight line through a grimy, web-cracked window pane into the cavernous interior of Warehouse 7. He settled himself, minimizing his silhouette, his breathing slow and controlled. The scene revealed under the stark, flickering glare of portable halogen work lamps sent a jolt of cold dread through him. Tied up at a crumbling internal pier, a relic of the port's older configuration Jack hadn't realized was still accessible, floated a sleek, low-profile speedboat, painted matte black, its twin outboard engines muffled but clearly powerful. Men in dark, functional tactical gear, moving with professional coordination, were offloading sealed, heavy-duty cases. They weren't dockworkers. They moved like soldiers or mercenaries, and overseeing them, confirming Jack's worst fears, were Razor Russo, looking tense and watchful, and beside him, radiating an unnerving stillness, Victor Martel. Jack had only seen grainy surveillance photos leaked occasionally in internal port security bulletins. Up close, even from this distance, Martel projected an aura of absolute lethal control. His presence here, personally supervising, screamed high stakes. Jack's eyes, trained to assess threats and identify ordnance, narrowed on the cases. They weren't the usual shape or size for narcotics or standard contraband. The markings were sparse, partially obscured by grime and the dim lighting, but he caught glimpses: Cyrillic script, biohazard trefoils, chemical hazard diamonds. He recognized the specific configurations from threat briefings long past. This wasn't just smuggling. This looked like trafficking in chemical or biological weapon components. The implications were staggering, reaching far beyond the port's usual litany of crime. The tension in the warehouse ratcheted higher. One of the boat crew, clearly the leader of the delivery team, stepped forward, engaging Russo in a heated, low-voiced argument in Russian. His gestures were sharp, directed first at the remaining cases on the boat, then towards Martel, who observed the exchange with chilling impassivity, his hands clasped behind his back. The man seemed agitated, perhaps shortchanged, perhaps realizing the true nature of the cargo and wanting out. Russo attempted to calm him, casting anxious glances towards Martel. The argument flared. The Russian spat a final insult, then made a critical error in judgment. He took an aggressive step towards Martel, his right hand darting inside his tactical vest. Martel reacted with predator's grace. There was no hesitation, no visible change in expression. A suppressed pistol appeared in his hand as if by magic, drawn from the concealment of his tailored greatcoat. Two soft fut-fut reports, barely audible over the warehouse echoes and the lapping water. The Russian operative's eyes widened in brief surprise before he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, an unfired Makarov pistol skittering across the concrete near his outstretched hand. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the drip of condensation from the high ceiling and the gentle slap of water against the speedboat's hull. Martel calmly surveyed the scene, the suppressor still smoking faintly. He issued a curt order in Russian. Two of Russo's nearby thugs holstered their own drawn weapons and moved forward without expression. They grabbed the dead man unceremoniously by his boots and shoulders, dragged him to a heavy iron mooring ring, quickly secured his ankles to it with thick zip ties, and heaved the body over the edge of the pier into the black, oily water. There was barely a splash, just a silent consumption by the harbor's depths. Waste disposal, cold and efficient. Martel spoke again, his voice still quiet but cutting through the vast space. The remaining boat crew, their faces now masks of fear and rigid obedience, returned to unloading the cases with frantic, silent intensity. Russo visibly relaxed his shoulders, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and began barking clipped orders to his men to secure the area. Jack's pulse hammered against his ribs. Witnessing a murder was bad enough. Witnessing Martel commit murder, tied directly to this cargo. This wasn't a loose end Martel could afford. This was a thread that could unravel his entire empire, expose him to forces far beyond local law enforcement. Jack knew with absolute certainty that whoever saw this could not be allowed to live. He had to get out. Now, slowly, meticulously, he began his withdrawal. Reverse the steps, maintain silence, control breathing, fight the primal urge to sprint. Panic attracts predators. He eased back from the window, slid down from the pallet stack, landing silently. He began to retreat into the dense fog, using the container stacks as baffles against sight and sound. He was almost into the relative safety of the deeper fog banks when his worn boot heel caught on a jagged piece of loose reinforcing bar protruding from a cracked concrete slab, hidden by shadows and grime. He stumbled, windmilling his arms for balance, his shoulder bumping hard against the cold, corrugated steel wall of a container. The resulting clang wasn't loud in the grand scheme of the port's noise, but in the focused silence following the execution, it was a gunshot. Inside Warehouse 7, every head snapped towards the sound, towards the broken window. Martel's eyes, sharp as ice shards, instantly locked onto the spot. Russo, outside. Now! His voice cracked like a whip. Russo, already moving, signaled to two of his men, and the trio burst through the main roll-up door of Warehouse 7. Weapons up, flashlights cutting frantic arcs through the fog. The adrenaline hit Jack like a physical blow, washing away the dockworker, leaving only Neptune. Contact rear. Egress route compromised. Initiate evasive maneuvers. Identify alternate vectors. His mind snapped into tactical assessment mode. Running back towards Pier 9 or 12 was suicide. It was the obvious path, the one they'd expect. Instead, he veered sharply left, plunging deeper into the container yard's maze, away from the activity, towards the older, less used southern sector of the port. Fan out. Check the stacks. Russo's roar echoed, distorted by the fog. He couldn't have gone far. The boss wants him, breathing preferably. If not, bring me proof. Jack moved with a speed and fluidity that belied his size. He vaulted lashed bundles of dunnage, squeezed through impossibly narrow gaps between containers, the cold steel pressing against his sides. He used the fog like a cloak, the towering stacks like temporary fortifications. The sounds of pursuit were sporadic, muffled shouts, the scrape of boots on concrete, the sweep of flashlight beams slicing impotently through the dense gray air. But they were organized, spreading out, attempting to encircle, escape. The main gate was unthinkable miles away, certainly watched, likely manned by Serpent sympathizers among the private security force. The perimeter fences were formidable, 12 feet high, crowned with razor wire, electronically monitored in the active sectors. The water, tempting, but the speedboat proved they had fast aquatic pursuit capability. He needed ground, distance, anonymity. He found himself near a row of darkened, silent maintenance sheds and workshops. An idea born of desperate necessity surfaced. He selected a shed slightly removed from the others. The padlock was old, corroded, recalling long-dormant skills from seer, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, training. He found a thin piece of scrap metal for tension and a sturdy piece of wire from a discarded electrical conduit. His fingers, surprisingly nimble despite their calluses, worked the tumblers. Click, the lock sprang open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of grease, solvents, and cold metal. A quick scan with his regained flashlight revealed potential assets. Thick leather work gloves, a heavy-duty pry bar, a Halligan tool, practically an extension of a firefighter's or breacher's will. A 50-foot coil of new, half-inch nylon rope, a small toolbox containing wrenches and screwdrivers. Primitive but better than empty hands. He clipped the pry bar to his belt, slung the rope over his shoulder. He needed to break their containment attempt before they fully sealed the southern perimeter. He began moving parallel to the water again, but staying deep within the container stacks, listening intently. They were closer now, working methodically. A flashlight beam lanced through the fog just yards ahead, sweeping across the path he was about to take. He froze mid-stride, melting into the narrow space between two 40-foot containers, pressing himself flat against the cold, damp metal. He slowed his breathing, becoming part of the shadows, part of the fog. Footsteps crunched nearby, past his position, receded. Two men judging by the sound. Moving too fast, not searching thoroughly enough. Overconfident. He slipped out and continued his diagonal path towards the derelict southwestern edge of the port complex, an area dominated by abandoned rail spurs and crumbling warehouses slated for demolition years ago but left to decay. Weeds grew thick and tall between the rusting tracks, reclaiming the industrial scar. This dead zone was his best chance. He found temporary refuge inside the skeletal remains of a two-story brick administration building, gutted by fire long ago. The roof was mostly collapsed, open to the elements, the interior a treacherous landscape of charred beams, broken glass, and debris. From a gaping, broken window frame on the second floor, shrouded in darkness, he established an observation post. He laid the pry bar within easy reach, uncoiled the rope slightly. His senses stretched out into the night, hyper-attuned. Every distant shout, the splash of water far below, the groan of rusting metal in the wind, the intermittent sweep of searchlights, he catalogued, analyzed, assessed. The careful facade of Jack Callahan, Dockworker, had crumbled away completely. Captain Callahan was back in command, processing the tactical situation with icy clarity. Threat: Level Alpha, Blackwater Serpents, led by Victor Martel. Estimated 10 to 15 active searchers in current vicinity, likely more securing exits. Armed? Pistols, possibly SMGs, disciplined, at least Russo's core team, motivated by extreme risk exposure, WMD smuggling, murder witness, possess intimate knowledge of port terrain and likely control over some security assets. Assets: personal extensive special operations training, CQB, stealth, evasion, improvised measures, SEER, peak physical condition, detailed knowledge of Pier 9/12's area, less so this sector, element of tactical surprise. Material: pry bar, rope, gloves, basic tools. Environmental: dense fog, complex terrain, cover/concealment. Time: pre-dawn confusion. Liabilities: unarmed, no communications, identity discovery imminent, payroll records, limited local knowledge, this sector, isolated, numerically overwhelmed. Primary liability: exhaustion, potential for past trauma triggers under stress. Immediate objective: break containment. Escape Port Argent perimeter undetected. Secondary objective: establish secure location. Reassess threat. Develop counter-strategy. Long-term survival requires proactive measures, not just evasion. Going to authorities remains high risk due to potential serpent infiltration. Time bled away. An hour, maybe more. The frantic energy of the initial search subsided, replaced by a more systematic, coordinated pattern. They were establishing concentric rings, sweeping inward, using vehicles on the accessible access roads to patrol the perimeter of the search zone. Martel was thinking tactically, using Russo's brute force intelligently. They wouldn't give up. The stakes were too high. Staying put until daylight was untenable. A thorough, grid-by-grid search would inevitably find him. He had to move, penetrate the cordon while it was still relatively porous. He scanned the landscape visible through the window again. The disused rail lines offered the most promising egress route. They snaked southwest, away from the main port activity, towards a marshy, undeveloped buffer zone bordering an old, crumbling service road. That road was his ticket out. He waited, listening to the pattern of the search. A vehicle patrol passed on a nearby access road. Shouts indicated foot searchers moving methodically through the container field about 200 yards to his east. He gauged the timing. Now, securing one end of the rope to a solid, fire-damaged steel beam, he tossed the coil out the window. The rope unfurled silently, disappearing into the gloom below. Using techniques ingrained through countless rappels from cliffs, helicopters, buildings, he went over the edge, controlling his descent, his gloved hands feeding the rope smoothly, his boots finding purchase on the rough brickwork, making barely a whisper. He landed lightly on the weed-choked earth below. Retrieving the rope with a quick flick learned from fast roping extractions, he coiled it quickly and moved towards the rail lines. He stayed low, using the hulks of derelict freight cars and dense patches of overgrown vegetation as cover. The rusting tracks guided him southwestward. He hadn't covered more than 75 yards when the low growl of an engine materialized from the fog ahead, moving slowly along a parallel gravel path he hadn't seen. Weak headlights diffused through the mist, illuminating swirling patterns. A dark pickup truck, subtly marked with a tiny serpent logo on the door, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. A mobile patrol sweeping the inner perimeter. Jack ducked behind the corroded bulk of a tanker car, pressing himself against the cold, curved steel. Two men in the cab, their silhouettes visible, scanning left and right. Waiting them out was risky. Another patrol could be approaching from behind, boxing him in. He needed to neutralize this threat quickly and silently. His eyes swept the immediate area. A pile of discarded railway sleepers, heavy creosote-soaked timbers, lay beside the track. Improvised weapon. Timing was critical. As the pickup drew level with the tanker car, moving at barely 5 miles per hour, Jack erupted from cover. He seized the end of the nearest sleeper, a deadlift requiring raw strength, pivoted on his heel, and swung the heavy timber in a low arc, putting his entire body weight behind it. He aimed for the front passenger side wheel and axle assembly. The impact was sickeningly solid. A loud thwack echoed, followed instantly by the grating shriek of tortured metal. The truck's tie rod snapped clean. The steering wheel whipped uselessly in the driver's hands as the vehicle veered sharply, uncontrollably, and slammed nose first into a low concrete retaining wall with a jarring crunch. Airbags deployed. Before the dazed occupants could fully register what had happened, Jack was on them. He ripped open the passenger door. The man inside, groggy from the impact, was instinctively reaching for a pistol holstered on his hip. Jack used the heavy truck door itself as a weapon, slamming it back against the man, pinning his arm and shoulder against the frame. A precisely targeted elbow strike to the temporal bone, just behind the eye socket. The man went limp, unconscious. The driver was already scrambling out his side, panic widening his eyes. He managed to draw his weapon, a standard Glock, but he wasn't seasoned muscle like Russo's crew. Hired help, maybe, terrified and clumsy. As he raised the pistol, Jack lunged. He still held the pry bar, not as a striking weapon, but as a tool. He swept it low and hard against the driver's ankles. The man's feet went out from under him, sending him crashing backward onto the gravel path. His head hit the ground with a distinct thud, and the Glock flew from his grasp, skittering into the weeds. Jack stepped forward and delivered a controlled, non-lethal blow with the flat side of the pry bar to the base of the man's skull. He slumped, motionless, neutralized. The entire engagement took less than 10 seconds. Calculated, brutal efficiency. Minimal noise after the initial crash. He dragged both men quickly out of sight behind the tanker car. A rapid search yielded a handheld radio, which he promptly smashed against the rail track. 2 spare pistol magazines, which he pocketed. Ammunition was always useful, even without the corresponding weapon yet. A roll of duct tape, and about $300 in cash. He left the Glock where it fell in the weeds. Acquiring an unregistered firearm now would complicate his immediate goal of escape and evasion. For now, speed and silence were his best weapons. But the crash, however brief the subsequent action, would be a beacon. He could already hear renewed shouting from the direction of the main search area. Voices raised in alarm, questioning the source of the noise. He had mere minutes before they converged on this spot. He didn't hesitate. Breaking away from the wreck, he sprinted along the rail lines, pushing deeper into the overgrown, marshy terrain. The ground became softer, sucking at his boots. Reeds taller than his head clawed at him, obscuring his vision. The air grew thick with the smell of stagnant water and decay. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit gradually organized, focusing towards the crash site. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, driven by adrenaline and the cold certainty of the threat behind him. The rail lines eventually petered out near a low, dilapidated barbed wire fence marking the port's forgotten boundary. Beyond it lay the service road, barely more than 2 tire tracks disappearing into the marsh and fog. He checked the fence, rusted, poorly maintained. He found a section where the lower strands were loose, pulled them apart, and squeezed through, tearing his flannel shirt but getting clear. He reached the cracked asphalt of the service road and paused, dropping into a low crouch, listening intently. The sounds of the port, the shouts, the engines, the crash investigation were now muffled by distance and the thick fog. Here, only the whisper of the wind through the tall marsh grass and the distant, Lonely cry of a night bird broke the silence. He had broken the cordon. He was out, but relief was fleeting, instantly replaced by the stark reality of his situation. He looked back at the faint, malevolent glow of Port Argent filtering through the fog. His life there, the 5 years of cultivated anonymity, the fragile peace he had sought, it was all gone, incinerated in the events of the last few hours. Victor Martel, the Blackwater Serpents, the horrific cargo in Warehouse 7. They wouldn't just let this go. They would hunt him relentlessly. They thought they were hunting Jack Callahan, the quiet dockworker. They had no idea they had just awakened Neptune. A grim, cold determination settled over him, displacing the fear, hardening into resolve. He felt the familiar weight of his past, not as a burden to be escaped, but as a resource to be tapped. He reached into his pocket, his fingers instinctively finding the smooth, familiar shape of the small, dark stone he'd carried for years, a piece of volcanic sand, polished by the surf of a landing beach on the other side of the world, a reminder of who he was, what he could do. He turned his back on the port's glow and began walking briskly down the service road, melting into the pre-dawn darkness. He was alone, exposed, hunted, stripped of his assumed life. But he was alive, he was free, and he was thinking tactically again. The city awaited a sprawling urban battle space. He needed to disappear, re-equip, gather intelligence, and then take the fight to them. The Serpents wanted silence. He would give them war. His first priority: find a temporary, untraceable sanctuary. Then, assess the true extent of the Serpents' reach and resources, and find leverage. What he saw in Warehouse 7 was potent leverage, if he could survive long enough to use it. The path ahead was fraught with peril, an uncertain sea. He was navigating by instinct now, the old skills flooding back, sharp and demanding. He picked up his pace, the fog swirling around him like a shroud, the first true cliffhanger of his new life just barely navigated. The long, desperate struggle for survival had only just begun. Part 2. Urban Ghosts and Gathering Storms. The pre-dawn chill clung to Jack Callahan like a shroud as he navigated the ragged edge where Port Argent bled into the city proper. The service road had dissolved into a network of cracked asphalt lanes winding through neglected industrial parks and decaying lots choked with weeds and discarded refuse. Dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, threatening to strip away the concealing darkness. He moved with purpose, sticking to shadows, using crumbling walls and overgrown fence lines as cover, his senses processing the urban soundscape, the distant rumble of the first commuter trains, the growl of sanitation trucks starting their routes, the lonely bark of a dog filtering out the mundane, listening for the discordant note of pursuit. He needed sanctuary, anonymity. His apartment near the port was worse than useless now, it was a trap waiting to be sprung. His face, his name, Jack Callahan, Dockworker, would soon be known to every Serpent asset. He had maybe a few hours at most before his photo, pulled from port employment records, was circulating. The cash he'd taken from the neutralized patrol, barely $300, wouldn't last long. He skirted the edges of the awakening city, avoiding main thoroughfares, melting into the transient populations that existed in the urban periphery. He knew these spaces, not from personal experience but from training, understanding how to disappear within the folds of society, how to mimic the patterns of those overlooked and ignored. He found himself in a district known as the Iron Triangle, a blighted zone of defunct factories, scrapyards, and derelict warehouses sandwiched between railway lines and a polluted canal. It was a place the city had largely forgotten, populated by the desperate, the discarded, and those who preyed on them. Perfect for temporary invisibility, but dangerous in its own right. He located a relatively secure shell, the third floor of an abandoned textile mill. Its windows were mostly boarded up or broken out, offering multiple sight lines and egress routes. The lower floors were frequented by squatters and addicts, judging by the debris and crude shelters, but the upper levels seemed less trafficked, accessible only by a rusted, treacherous external fire escape and crumbling internal stairs. He chose a corner room with defensible angles overlooking both the main railway line and a neglected side street. He used debris to subtly reinforce the door, creating early warning trip hazards. It wasn't a fortress, but it was defensible concealment. For now, it would have to do. He allowed himself 5 minutes of stillness, crouched in the dusty darkness, listening. The adrenaline from the escape was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the familiar, unpleasant hum of hypervigilance. He took stock. Minor scrapes and bruises, a tear in his shirt, clothes damp and smelling of fog, marsh water, and fear. He needed to change his appearance, acquire basic supplies. Meanwhile, back at Port Argent, the atmosphere inside Victor Martel's temporary command center, a luxuriously appointed but functionally secure office suite within a serpent-controlled logistics company overlooking the main channel, was thick with controlled fury. Razor Russo stood rigidly, his face bruised where the steering wheel had likely hit him during the crash Jack had caused, reporting the failure. He disabled the truck, took out Miller and Jones. Cleanly. Too cleanly for a panicked dockworker, Russo grunted, his voice tight with frustration and barely concealed pain. By the time backup arrived, he was gone, vanished into the marshland tracks. Martel sat behind a large, polished mahogany desk, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. He showed no outward anger, only a chilling stillness more menacing than any outburst. Callahan, Jack, Pier 12 worker. 5 years service, unremarkable record. Lives alone, keeps to himself. No known family locally. He consulted a tablet displaying Jack's employment file, complete with a grainy ID photo. Unremarkable, he repeated, tapping the photo. Yet this unremarkable man witnesses something he shouldn't, evades experienced search teams in zero visibility, navigates the container maze like a rat, disables a vehicle patrol, incapacitates 2 armed men without using lethal force apparently, and disappears from a contained area. Does that sound unremarkable to you, Russo? Russo shifted uncomfortably. No, boss. It sounds trained. Precisely, Martel said softly. Someone taught this dockworker how to move, how to fight, how to disappear. The lack of lethal force is also interesting. Calculated? Professional, perhaps? He took a slow sip of his drink. We underestimated him. A mistake we will not repeat. He looked up, his eyes like chips of gray ice. Double the patrols at all port exits. Put the word out on the street. Use our usual channels. $10,000 for information leading to his location. $50,000 for bringing him to me. Alive. I want to know who he is, who he works for, and what he thinks he saw. He paused. Circulate the photo. Check all city transit hubs, bus stations, train station, airport, even ferry terminals. Monitor his known associates, however tenuous. Check financial activity, though I suspect a man like this operates off the grid. Martel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a silken threat. Find him, Russo. Find this ghost. Tear the city apart if you have to. He saw the transfer. He saw my face. He cannot be allowed to remain a loose variable. The merchandise is secure for now, but phase 2 of its transit is imminent. Callahan is a complication we must resolve. Permanently. Russo nodded curtly. Consider it done, boss. He turned and left, radiating grim determination. Martel stared at Callahan's photo on the tablet, a flicker of analytical curiosity mingling with the cold ruthlessness in his eyes. Who is this Jack Callahan? As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the grimy windows of the abandoned mill, Jack ventured out. He needed to blend, resupply. He moved through the iron triangle, mimicking the shuffling gait, the downcast eyes of the truly destitute, his large frame hunched slightly beneath his torn flannel. He observed the flow, the unspoken rules of this micro-society. He needed clothes, food, water, basic first aid supplies. He found a soup kitchen run by a weary-looking church group several blocks away. Waiting patiently in line, he got a hot meal, watery stew, and stale bread, but more importantly, observed. He listened to the chatter, the rumors, the flow of street information. No mention of a manhunt yet, but it was early. He ate quickly, head down, drawing no attention. Next, a dilapidated thrift store on the edge of the district. He used $60 of his precious cash to buy worn jeans a size too large, a dark, hooded sweatshirt several sizes too big to obscure his frame, sturdy but nondescript work boots, and a baseball cap. He changed in the store's filthy restroom, bundling his old clothes into a plastic bag he found, which he later dumped in an overflowing public bin miles away. He bought cheap sunglasses. The transformation wasn't perfect, but combined with the cap pulled low and the hood up occasionally, it would help him avoid casual recognition from the grainy ID photo Martel undoubtedly now possessed. He spent another $20 at a corner store on bottled water, high-calorie protein bars, a cheap disposable lighter, antiseptic wipes, bandages, and athletic tape. Basic survival kit. He moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be noticed, backtracking, varying his routes, using alleys and less-traveled paths. Tradecraft. Survival 101. His most critical need was information. How widespread was the search? Were the police involved, officially or unofficially? What more could he learn about Martel and the Serpents? He needed access to the internet, but cyber cafes were risky, cameras, traceable logins. He opted for the public library downtown, a calculated risk. It was large, busy, offered a degree of anonymity in the crowd, and had free public access terminals. He took a circuitous bus route, paying cash, sitting near the back exit, scanning fellow passengers, observing street corners. The city felt different now, charged with potential threat. Every idling car seemed suspicious, every pair of watchful eyes felt directed at him. Paranoia was a survival tool, but it was exhausting. At the library, he found a terminal in a relatively secluded corner. He kept his searches broad, generic at first. Local news. Any reports of unusual activity at the port overnight? Nothing yet, beyond standard shipping news. He searched for Victor Martel. Sparse public information. Wealthy international businessman, investments in shipping and logistics, philanthropist, a carefully curated public image, no doubt, rumors of underworld connections consistently denied. Blackwater Serpents yielded more hits, mostly crime blotter mentions of extortion, suspected smuggling rings, occasional violent incidents hushed up or attributed to generic gang warfare. No mention of WMDs, nothing linking Martel directly in any official capacity. They were good at maintaining plausible deniability. He tried searching for the Cyrillic markings and hazard symbols he remembered. His blood ran colder as preliminary results suggested components related to nerve agents or possibly highly volatile biological cultures. The sheer scale of what he might have stumbled upon hit him anew. This wasn't just about port gangs, this potentially had international implications. Why was Martel involved? Who were the buyers? Where was the cargo headed next? He forced himself to calm down, clear the search history, log off. He couldn't afford to go down rabbit holes now. Focus on survival. But the knowledge added weight to his already heavy burden. He wasn't just running for his life, he might be the only person aware of an impending catastrophe. As he exited the library, blending into the lunchtime pedestrian traffic, he felt it, the distinct prickle of being watched. Not just the generalized paranoia, but a focused surveillance. He didn't turn abruptly. He paused at a street vendor's cart, pretending to browse cheap trinkets, using the reflective surface of a nearby shop window to scan behind him. Two men. Nondescript clothing, but they moved with a coordinated stillness, attempting to be casual but failing. One spoke quietly into his collar. Serpent spotters. They must have staked out likely locations, libraries, transit hubs, shelters. They had his picture now. Initiate counter-surveillance detection sequence. He started walking again, faster now, turning corners abruptly, ducking into crowded stores and exiting through different doors, using the flow of people as a moving shield. He needed to break contact cleanly without alerting them that he'd made them. He ducked into a bustling indoor market, a chaotic warren of stalls selling everything from fresh produce to cheap electronics. The noise and crowds were perfect cover. He moved deeper inside, weaving through shoppers, overturning a stack of fruit crates accidentally on purpose to create a momentary diversion and block line of sight. He slipped through a curtained doorway behind a butcher's stall, finding himself in a narrow, greasy service corridor reeking of stale blood and disinfectant. He moved quickly down the corridor, emerging into a loading dock area behind the market. He vaulted a low wall into an adjacent alleyway, then another, putting distance and obstacles between himself and the spotters. He didn't stop moving until he was several blocks away, heart pounding, sweat cooling on his skin despite the afternoon warmth. That was too close. They were actively hunting, using coordinated teams. The city was shrinking around him. He needed a better plan than just hiding and reacting. He needed to get proactive, find leverage, find a way to fight back. Hiding in the Iron Triangle wasn't sustainable. He needed resources, maybe allies. The thought made him uneasy. Bringing anyone else into this was dangerous, potentially fatal for them. He considered his past. Team Trident was scattered, most still active duty, unreachable, or too risky to contact. There were others, contacts made during his service, men and women operating in the gray areas of intelligence and private security. but reaching out carried immense risk, exposing himself, potentially leading the Serpents to them. There was one possibility, a long shot. A former colleague, not from Recon, but from an intelligence support unit attached to his old command. Name, Marcus Thorne. Callsign, Oracle. Thorne was a signals intelligence and cyber warfare specialist, medically discharged years ago after an IED incident left him with a prosthetic leg and a deep-seated cynicism about the world. Last Jack heard, Thorne was living off-grid somewhere, doing freelance cybersecurity consulting, deeply paranoid and distrustful of everyone, especially the government he once served. If anyone could help him dig into Martel's network or trace the cargo without leaving tracks, it was Thorne. But finding him, let alone convincing him to help, was another matter entirely. Thorne valued his anonymity above all else. Contacting him would require finesse, a signal only Thorne would recognize. Jack spent the afternoon moving cautiously, observing, planning. He needed untraceable communication. He used more of his dwindling cash to buy a cheap burner phone and a prepaid SIM card from a small electronics stall in a different part of town, paying cash, ensuring the transaction wasn't caught on camera. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the iron triangle, Jack returned to his temporary refuge in the abandoned mill. He felt exposed, hunted. The close call at the library had shaken him. The Serpents were closing the net. He needed to make a move. He sat in the darkness, the burner phone feeling heavy in his hand. He remembered an old emergency communication protocol Thorne had devised based on obscure historical ciphers and public message board postings. It was complex, designed for deniability, reliant on Thorne even monitoring the specific channels anymore. A true long shot. He composed a carefully worded, coded message embedding keywords related to a specific shared past operation, referencing a mutual, obscure interest. He posted it to a defunct, barely moderated online forum dedicated to antique clock repair, one of Thorne's known eccentric hobbies. No names, no direct requests, just a signal flare into the digital void. Would Thorne see it? Would he understand? Would he even care? Jack had no way of knowing. All he could do was wait and prepare for the possibility that he was truly, utterly alone in this fight. He settled in for the night, wedging himself into a relatively clean corner, the pry bar within easy reach. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, every shout from the street below put him on instant alert. He replayed the events in Warehouse 7, the faces of Martel and Rousseau, the glint of the weapon components. He thought about the men he'd lost under his command, the weight of responsibility. He hadn't wanted this life again, the constant vigilance, the necessity of violence. But it had found him. Sometime after midnight, the distinct sound of shattering glass from the ground floor echoed up the stairwell, followed by rough voices, louder and more aggressive than the usual denizens of the mill. Not junkies arguing over a fix. These sounded purposeful, organized. Jack grabbed the pry bar, his body instantly tense. He moved silently to the broken window overlooking the side street. Below, two dark sedans had pulled up, engines idling. Several figures were moving towards the mill's main entrance, flashlights cutting through the darkness. One figure, larger than the rest, unmistakable even in silhouette, was directing them. Rousseau. They hadn't just identified him. They tracked him here. How? A spotter he missed? An informant in the triangle? Had his library access been flagged somehow? It didn't matter now. They were here. The hunt had arrived at his doorstep. He scanned the room, his mind racing through tactical options. The fire escape? Too exposed, they'd likely cover it. The internal stairs? A potential choke point, but fighting his way down through multiple armed men was suicidal. He looked up. The roof was partially collapsed, but some beams looked intact, leading towards an adjacent, equally derelict building. High risk, uncertain footing, but potentially his only way out. He heard heavy boots on the stairs, ascending deliberately, checking each floor. They were clearing the building systematically. He didn't have much time. He moved towards the weakest point in the ceiling, using the pry bar to test beams, looking for a path. Dust rained down as he pulled himself up, muscles straining. Above him, the night sky was visible through gaps in the rotten roof structure. Below, the sounds of the search team grew louder, closer. They were on his floor now, kicking open doors, flashlights sweeping across empty rooms. He's gotta be here. Rousseau's voice snarled from down the hall. Check every damn corner. The boss wants him. Jack found a precarious route across sagging beams, moving towards the adjacent building's roofline. He had to cross a 3-foot gap, the alleyway yawning dark and deep below. He braced himself, took a running leap, and landed hard on the gritty tar paper of the next roof, rolling to absorb the impact. A shout from below. There. On the roof. He's crossing over. Flashlight beams stabbed upwards, pinning him momentarily. A gunshot cracked through the night air, the bullet whining past his head, ricocheting off a brick chimney. They were shooting. Lethal force was now authorized. Jack scrambled behind the chimney, bullets chipping fragments of brick around him. He was trapped on an exposed rooftop, multiple shooters below, his only weapon a pry bar. He peered cautiously around the edge. Russo was directing his men, spreading them out to cover the roof from different angles. They were trying to box him in. He looked around frantically. An old water tower stood on the far corner of this roof, its metal rusted, its ladder questionable. If he could reach it, maybe use it for cover, find a way down the other side. Another volley of shots forced him back behind the chimney. They had him pinned. He was out of options, outgunned, exposed. The cold dread returned, sharper this time. Had his luck finally run out? Was this the end of the line, cornered like an animal on a rooftop in the forgotten part of the city? He gripped the pry bar, knuckles white, his mind racing, searching for a non-existent tactical advantage. Below, Russo's men were already seeking access to this building, preparing to trap him from below as well. The net was closing, tight and suffocating. Part 3. High Tide and Reckoning. Pinned behind the crumbling brick chimney, the night air alive with the sharp crack of pistol fire and the angry whine of ricochets, Jack Callahan knew cover was temporary. Bullets chewed at the edges of his refuge, spraying brick dust and mortar fragments. Below, Russo's voice, tight with fury, directed the fusillade. Pin him. Don't let him move. Second team, inside. Roof access now. Trapped. Exposed. Outgunned. The familiar trinity of impending doom. But panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Assess. Adapt. Overcome. The old mantra echoed, cutting through the fear. He risked a quick glance. For shooters visible below on the street level, using cars for cover. More heading into the building beneath him. Time was measured in seconds. The water tower. 50 feet away across exposed rooftop. Its rusted ladder looked skeletal, unreliable. But it was elevation, cover, maybe an anchor point. He needed a diversion. His eyes scanned the rooftop debris, loose tar paper, gravel, discarded ventilation parts, a length of rusted conduit. An idea sparked, desperate and dangerous. He ripped loose a piece of heavy, rolled tar paper. He stuffed fragments of other debris inside, wedged his disposable lighter into a fold, and sparked it. The bitumen-rich paper caught quickly, producing thick, acrid black smoke. Waiting for a lull in the firing, he hurled the smoldering bundle towards the opposite edge of the roof. It landed with a clatter, smoke billowing instantly, creating a visual screen in the uncertain light. What the hell? He trying to burn the place down, someone shouted below. Confusion, however momentary, was his ally. Hold fire. Watch that smoke. Russo bellowed. Jack moved. Low and fast, he sprinted from behind the chimney, bullets resuming their angry chorus around him as shooters adjusted. He ignored the zinging impacts on the gravel near his feet, focusing solely on the water tower's base. He reached it, pressing himself against the cold, curved metal. He risked a glance up the ladder. It looked intact, if severely weathered. He needed to get higher, break their line of sight, find another way down. He started climbing, the rusted rungs slick with dew and corrosion, groaning under his weight. He expected bullets to follow him up, but the angle was awkward for the shooters below. He reached the narrow catwalk encircling the tank just as heavy boot steps pounded onto the rooftop from the access door near where he'd first landed. Russo's second team had arrived. He's on the tower, a voice yelled. Jack didn't hesitate. He scrambled around the catwalk to the far side, momentarily shielded by the bulk of the water tank. Looking down the opposite side of the building, he saw a sheer drop of 4 stories to a narrow, trash-filled alley. No fire escape here. Dead end? No. His eyes caught it, a thick, insulated electrical conduit running down the brickwork, secured by heavy-duty brackets. Not ideal, but a potential pathway. He still had the rope slung over his shoulder. Working frantically, heart pounding against his ribs, he secured one end around a sturdy-looking support strut beneath the catwalk. Bullets began pinging off the metal tank near him as the team on the roof repositioned. He tossed the coil of rope over the edge. It snaked down into the darkness, falling short of the alley floor by at least 15 feet. Not perfect, but it would get him past the most dangerous exposure. He took a deep breath, gripped the rope, and launched himself off the catwalk into the void, rappelling down the building's face. Bricks scraped against his back. He controlled his descent, letting the rope slide through his gloved hands, his boots finding purchase on the conduit brackets where possible. Above, shouts and renewed gunfire erupted, but hitting a moving target rappelling in near darkness was difficult. The rope ended. He hung momentarily, 20 feet above the alley floor, his shoulders screaming from the strain. Below him was a dumpster overflowing with garbage bags. He gauged the distance, released his grip, and dropped. He hit the bags with a jarring impact that knocked the wind out of him but cushioned the fall. Garbage exploded around him. He scrambled out of the dumpster, ignoring the stench and the throbbing pain in his ankle from the landing. He could hear Russo yelling orders from the rooftop, directing men down to street level to cut off the alley exits. He was still in the kill box. He limped down the alley, pry bar held ready. He reached the street entrance just as one of the sedans screeched around the corner, headlights blinding him. Two figures leaped out, weapons raised. Jack reacted instantly, ducking behind another dumpster near the alley mouth. Bullets slammed into the metal beside his head. He needed to break contact. He scanned his surroundings. A stack of discarded tires. A pile of broken pallets. He grabbed a tire, heavy and awkward, and hurled it out into the street towards the shooters. It bounced erratically, causing one to flinch and momentarily redirect his aim. In that instant, Jack bolted across the street, zigzagging, using parked cars as intermittent cover. Another bullet tore through the sleeve of his sweatshirt, a burning kiss against his skin. He didn't stop. He plunged into another narrow alley on the opposite side, then another, putting distance and turns between himself and his pursuers. He ran until his lungs burned, his ankle screamed in protest, and the sounds of pursuit faded into the general city noise. He found himself miles away, near the polluted canal bordering the Iron Triangle. He collapsed behind a concrete retaining wall, gasping for air, shaking from adrenaline and exertion. He checked the wound on his arm, a clean through-and-through graze on his forearm. Painful, bleeding, but no major damage. His ankle was definitely sprained, swelling already beginning. He'd survived, but the cost was mounting. He tore strips from the bottom of his sweatshirt and used the antiseptic wipes and bandages from his meager kit to clean and dress the arm wound tightly. He used the athletic tape to strap his ankle, providing some support. He drank deeply from his water bottle, rationing the remaining sips. He needed a new plan, a new sanctuary. The Iron Triangle was burned. He checked the burner phone. One new notification. Not a text, but a metadata ping on the obscure forum where he'd left his message. A specific, tiny alteration in an unrelated, archived post, a single character changed. It was Thorne's acknowledgement signal. Cryptic, non-committal, but proof he'd seen the message. Hope, fragile but real, flickered within him. He sent a second coded message, embedding coordinates for a secure dead drop location beneath a specific loose brick in an old bridge abutment near the canal, and a simple request. Info Martel Network. Financials. Comms. Urgent. He added a second set of coordinates for a potential pickup in 12 hours. Now, all he could do was wait and hope Oracle delivered. Victor Martel received Russo's report of the second escape with icy displeasure. Callahan had not only evaded capture again but had actively fought back, using improvised tactics and demonstrating remarkable agility and resilience even while wounded. He is no Dockworker, Martel stated flatly, staring out at the lights of Port Argent. The way he moved on that roof, the way he used the environment, that is professional training. Military? We're running his prints now, checking databases beyond civilian records, Russo said, frustration evident in his voice. Facial recognition got partial hits, but nothing concrete yet. Find out who he is, Martel ordered, his voice dangerously soft. Use our contacts. Someone in the military or intelligence community might recognize the face or the skills profile. This changes things. We are not hunting a stray witness anymore. We are hunting someone who knows how to hunt back. Increase the bounty. Double it. And put his face everywhere in the underworld. I want his name. He turned from the window. And the merchandise transfer? Is Phase 2 still on schedule? Yes, boss, Russo confirmed. The buyers are confirmed. Transfer window opens in 36 hours. Pier 4 aboard the freighter Odessa Star. Good, Martel nodded. Ensure security is absolute. No more mistakes. And find me Callahan, before he becomes an even bigger problem. 12 agonizing hours later, Jack retrieved a small, waterproof package from the dead drop beneath the bridge abutment. Inside was a single encrypted flash drive. No note, no further communication. Classic Thorn. Jack found an old, abandoned pumping station nearby, its power surprisingly still active, likely overlooked by the utility companies. He risked plugging in the drive into a discarded, ancient computer monitor left behind, hoping the machine itself wasn't compromised. Thorn had delivered. The drive contained encrypted files detailing Serpent communication frequencies, known vehicle license plates, key personnel profiles, including Russo's predictable routines, and, most crucially, financial data pointing towards several shell corporations Martel used for money laundering. Thorn had also included satellite imagery of Port Argent, highlighting recent activity around Pier 4 and the freighter Odessa Star, flagged as having a dubious registration history and currently operating under armed Serpent guard. There was also a snippet of intercepted, heavily encrypted communications suggesting a high-value transfer coinciding with the Odessa Star's departure window in just over 24 hours. The cargo. Thorn had also added a personal, encrypted text file, Neptune. Knew you weren't rusting away. Watch your six. They're pinging mill databases hard for your face. Oracle out. So Thorn knew it was him. And Martel was actively trying to uncover his military past. The clock was ticking even faster now. Pure evasion wasn't an option anymore. He couldn't outrun Martel's resources indefinitely, especially if they identified him as Neptune. He had to disrupt the transfer, expose Martel, neutralize the threat of the WMD components. He looked at the intel Thorn provided. An idea began to form, audacious and incredibly risky. Hit them where it hurt, their money and their operations simultaneously. He spent the next few hours formulating a plan, using the intel on Russo's routines and the shell corporations. He needed a diversion, something big enough to pull key Serpent resources away from Pier 4 during the critical transfer window. He also needed undeniable proof of the WMDs to have any hope of bringing in legitimate authorities later, assuming he survived. His first move was calculated disruption. Using another burner phone acquired with his last few dollars, he made an anonymous tip to a rival gang known to have bad blood with the Serpents, feeding them accurate information courtesy of Thorn's intel. About the location of a significant Serpent drug stash, money Martel likely couldn't afford to lose, especially now. Simultaneously, he sent an anonymous, encrypted email to a financial crimes investigative journalist Thorn had flagged as tenacious and incorruptible, hinting at massive money laundering through specific shell corporations linked to Martel's logistics company, providing just enough verifiable detail to pique serious interest. Saw chaos create pressure from multiple directions. His ankle throbbed, his arm ached, exhaustion gnawed at him, but adrenaline and purpose fueled him. He used the remaining hours before the transfer window to prepare. He scavenged materials from the Iron Triangle, scrap metal, flammable liquids, wiring, old batteries, improvising crude but effective tools and diversionary devices. He studied the satellite imagery and schematics of Pier 4 and the Odessa Star. He knew the layout of the docks, the blind spots, the access points hidden from standard surveillance. The transfer window was set for 0200 hours. High tide. Perfect for an amphibious approach. At 0100 hours, clad in dark clothing acquired from his scavenging, his face smeared with grease and grime, Jack slipped into the cold, polluted waters of the canal near the port's edge. He swam silently, using the shadows of piers and moored barges as cover, his movements economical, conserving energy. The water was foul, but the cold helped numb the pain in his ankle and arm. He carried his pry bar, his improvised devices sealed in waterproof bags, and the encrypted flash drive containing Thorn's intel, his insurance policy. He reached the pilings beneath Pier 4 undetected. Serpent guards patrolled above, their flashlights cutting beams across the water, but they weren't expecting trouble from below. He scaled a rough concrete piling, moving like a wraith, using skills honed on countless hostile beaches. He reached the underside of the pier, a dark, cavernous space smelling of creosote and decay. He could hear activity above. The low thrum of the Odessa Star's generators, the rumble of a forklift, muffled voices giving orders in Russian and English. He moved along the underside beams towards the ship, positioned directly beneath the main loading crane. He planted his primary diversionary device, a timed incendiary designed to create smoke and fire but minimal structural damage, near a cluster of power conduits supplying the pier's main lights. He set the timer for 15 minutes. Enough time to get aboard. He swam the short distance to the Odessa Star's hull. The ship was riding high, its gangway heavily guarded. But freighters always had other access points. He located the anchor chain, thick with grease and grime. Using the pry bar for leverage and his remaining strength, he began the arduous climb up the chain towards the hawse pipe opening on the forecastle deck. He emerged onto the deck like a phantom rising from the sea, melting into the shadows behind deck machinery. 2 guards patrolled the forecastle. He waited for them to separate, then moved. He took the first guard from behind, a swift chokehold rendering him unconscious before he could make a sound. The second guard turned, sensing movement, but Jack was already there, using the pry bar in a swift, disabling strike to the knee, followed by a blow to the head. He dragged both guards out of sight, securing them with their own zip ties. He needed proof. He moved stealthily towards the main cargo hold where the loading activity was centered. Peering through a ventilation grate, he saw it, the same military-grade cases from Warehouse 7 being carefully loaded into a specially prepared, refrigerated container aboard the ship. Martel was there, overseeing the final stages, Russo at his side, looking tense. Suddenly, the pier lights flickered and died as Jack's diversionary device ignited below, sending sparks showering upwards and thick smoke billowing from beneath the pier. Shouts of alarm erupted. "Fire! Under the pier! Secure the cargo!" Martel yelled. "Russo, take half the men, deal with that fire. Now!" Russo and several guards charged down the gangway towards the smoke. This was Jack's chance. While confusion reigned, he slipped from his observation point, moving towards the open cargo container holding the WMD components. He needed photographic evidence. He pulled out the burner phone, snapping several clear pictures of the cases, the container markings, and Martel standing nearby giving orders. He was about to retreat when Martel turned, his eyes scanning the deck, sharp and suspicious despite the chaos. Their eyes met across the dimly lit cargo hold. Recognition flared instantly, mixed with cold fury on Martel's face. "Callahan, here." Martel drew his suppressed pistol. Jack dove behind a stack of pallets as bullets sparked off the deck where he'd been standing. Guards still aboard turned towards him, raising their weapons. Jack bolted, weaving through deck obstacles, heading back towards the forecastle and the anchor chain, his only escape route. He glanced back. Martel wasn't pursuing directly, he was shouting orders, directing his men to cut Jack off. But Russo, having quickly assessed the minor nature of the fire below, was charging back up the gangway, his face a mask of rage, spotting Jack immediately. "Callahan, you're dead!" Russo roared, raising his own sidearm. Jack sprinted, bullets snapping past him. He reached the forecastle just as Russo arrived, blocking his path to the anchor chain. The 2 men squared off amidst the deck machinery, shadows dancing around them from the flickering emergency lights and the distant glow of the fire below. "Nowhere left to run, Dockworker," Russo snarled, holstering his pistol, clearly preferring a more hands-on approach. He drew a heavy combat knife from his belt, its blade gleaming dully. Jack gripped his pry bar, the heavy steel his only defense against the enraged giant, and his knife. This was it, the physical culmination of the hunt. Russo lunged, knife slashing in a wide arc. Jack parried with the pry bar, sparks flying as metal struck metal. He used the bar's length to keep Russo at bay, blocking and dodging the furious stabs and slashes. Russo was stronger, fueled by rage, but Jack was faster, more precise, relying on years of close-quarters combat training. He feinted high with the pry bar, then swept it low, catching Russo behind the knees. The big man stumbled but didn't fall, recovering with surprising agility. He came back harder, forcing Jack backwards towards the ship's railing. Jack blocked another knife thrust, the force jarring his already injured arm. He saw an opening. As Russo lunged again, Jack pivoted, using Russo's momentum against him, and slammed the hooked end of the pry bar hard into Russo's knife hand. Russo roared in pain as the knife clattered away across the deck. He clutched his possibly broken hand, his eyes blazing with hatred. He charged, abandoning technique for sheer brute force, aiming to tackle Jack and crush him. Jack sidestepped the clumsy charge, brought the pry bar down hard on the back of Russo's exposed neck, just below the skull. Russo grunted, staggered, his eyes glazing over, and collapsed onto the deck, unconscious but alive. Jack didn't pause. He retrieved Russo's pistol, finally, a firearm, and turned just as Martel appeared on the forecastle, flanked by 2 remaining guards. "Impressive, Captain Callahan," Martel said, his voice calm despite the situation. He held up a tablet displaying Jack's military file, complete with a photo of a younger Neptune. Or should I say Neptune? Force Recon. It explains much. A pity you chose the wrong side. There's only one side when it comes to this poison, Jack retorted, gesturing towards the cargo hold with the pistol. Sentimentality, Martel sneered. This poison, as you call it, is merely commerce. Supplying a demand. A very lucrative demand. It ends here, Martel. Does it? Martel smiled coldly. Kill me and the buyers will simply find another source. Stop this shipment and they may become displeased. Perhaps they visit your old haunts, look up old friends. A veiled threat against anyone Jack ever knew. While Martel spoke, his guards subtly fanned out, trying to flank Jack. Jack tracked their movements, his pistol steady. Call them off, Martel. Why should I? You are one man. Wounded. Cornered. Maybe, Jack said, his eyes locking with Martel's. But this ship isn't leaving port with that cargo. And neither are you. From the darkness behind Martel, a red laser dot appeared on his chest. Then another. Nobody move. A new voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the night from the direction of the pier. Floodlights suddenly blazed to life, illuminating the Odessa Star and Pier 4. Armed figures in tactical gear, not serpent thugs, but official police SWAT units, were swarming the pier and boarding the ship via the gangway. Martel stared, momentarily stunned. How? Jack allowed himself a grim half-smile. The dead drop from Thorn hadn't just contained intel. It contained a time transmitter activated remotely by Thorn once Jack was aboard, broadcasting their location and a summary of the situation, including Jack's photos, directly to the one high-ranking, trusted police contact Thorn maintained for emergencies. Oracle had delivered more than just data. He'd called in the cavalry, trusting Jack to handle the situation until they arrived. Martel's guards hesitated, caught between Jack and the advancing SWAT team. Seeing his advantage evaporate, Martel made a desperate move. He shoved one guard forward as a shield and bolted towards the far side of the ship, firing wildly back towards Jack and the police. Jack didn't shoot. He let the SWAT team handle Martel. They returned fire, commands echoing across the deck. Martel hit, stumbled near the railing, dropped his weapon, and pitched over the side into the dark water below. The remaining guards dropped their weapons, hands raised. Russo lay unconscious. The WMD components were secure. It was over. SWAT officers surrounded Jack, weapons trained on him. Drop the weapon. Hands in the air. Jack slowly placed Russo's pistol on the deck and raised his hands. He was exhausted, bleeding, aching, but alive. He had stopped Martel, stopped the cargo. Epilogue. In the aftermath, Jack Callahan, aka former Captain Callahan, became a man caught between two worlds. Thorn's intel, combined with Jack's testimony and the evidence secured aboard the Odessa Star, led to the dismantling of what remained of the Blackwater Serpents. The WMD components were secured by federal agencies, sparking a quiet international incident. The investigative journalist broke the money laundering story, causing chaos in Martel's legitimate business fronts. Martel's body was never recovered from the harbor, though few believed he'd survived the fall and the subsequent police search. Jack cooperated fully, providing intelligence but carefully omitting Thorn's involvement. His actions were technically illegal, vigilantism, assault, breaking and entering, but given the circumstances and the nature of the threat he'd stopped, authorities were lenient. After extensive debriefing, he was released, his true identity kept carefully under wraps. He couldn't return to the docks. The anonymity he craved was gone, replaced by the shadow of Neptune. He left Port Argent carrying his few possessions and the weight of his actions. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. He found himself, weeks later, sitting on a remote beach watching the waves crash onto the sand. The smooth, dark stone from that other beach half a world away felt warm in his hand. He had faced the violence he tried to escape, used the skills he tried to bury, and survived. Peace remained elusive, perhaps impossible. But as the sun set, painting the sky in colors of fire and hope, Jack Callahan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose fulfilled, a quiet understanding that sometimes the only way to protect the shore is to embrace the storm. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since leaving the Corps, he felt ready to face the tide. He stood up, brushed the sand from his clothes, and started walking along the water's edge, a solitary figure against the vast ocean, finally moving forward.